Go. All yours, Thierry.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming along and welcome aboard. About 6 months ago, I would say, Jacobite Scotland starting putting online a new website, which is intended to help visitors to Scotland create their own trail, which means trying to find the best route to join together various sites, museums, and locations, whereby they could generate their own Jacobite trails and follow the route of potentially Bonnie Prince Charlie or any other member of his followers who might be of interest to them. At that point, Baron Gordon Preston-Grange suggested that perhaps we could envisage having a Jacobite Trail of Brittany, which would be a interesting subset in connection with Scotland, since the French ships that sailed from Brittany brought over to Scotland Prince Charles Edward Stuart and the Seven of Moidart. Several missions also started from Brittany to carry weapons, ammunitions, gold, and brandy to Scotland in support of the Jacobite uprising of 1745. And this is quite interesting in many ways, because it provides a maritime sort of picture in complement of the existing knowledge we have of the Jacobite events that took place in Scotland. And without the maritime element, we miss a little bit of the link with Europe and the importance of the support that could have come from there. Finally, there is also a very interesting part, which is the return of the prince back to Brittany from Loch, which was the sixth rescue mission to bring the prince back to safety. So we're going to try to put together a list of those sites and produce the Jacobite Trail of Brittany. So we'll give you a little bit of background of what we were trying to do back a few years ago before the pandemic started. So many years ago, in fact, Gordon, if I may call you as such, actually went to Brittany on visit to the west of France and met various friends of mine. I come from Saint-Nazaire, and they're interested in the history group in studying the link between Saint-Nazaire and the British Isles, going back to several centuries. And one of the topic of interest is the visit of Prince Charles Edward Stuart through our town, and in particular the departure of the Teillay, the ship that brought the prince to Scotland. This became part of the panels made up the Preston tapestry, in particular the boarding from Nantes, and then the subsequent departure of the Teillay to Belle-Île from Saint-Nazaire, and then on its way to Scotland. The Preston tapestry then was exhibited in Pornichet, which is a little town just near Saint-Nazaire, where there was a lot of interest raised. And to be fair, a lot of people in France do have no idea what the Jacobite uprising is all about, except for a few academics and passionate historians, as well as a few amateurs like myself. It's very much a topic totally absent from French history books. Nevertheless, it needed a race course in Pornichet to be able to display the tapestry. In addition, the Preston tapestry with Dr. Aaron Johnston and Baron Gordon Preston-Grange came to Loch for the very large festival called Festival Interceltique de Loch in 2017, which was the year of Scotland. and got exhibited there. So it attracted a lot of interest and visitors who come around August to that particular festival. But the problem is, what can we do beyond a few panels in Preston Span's tapestry? Is there sufficient material to produce a complete list of various sites that would be of interest to the Jacobite uprising of 1745, and beyond that, even connections with the Stuarts? And you'll be surprised probably to hear there's quite a bit of connection between the Stuart and Brittany, and of course Brittany and the Jacobite uprising of 1745. So the initial objectives were to research the individual stories in Brittany from existing material that's been already published, possibly looking through the archives, see if you find anything more, and compile some sites in Brittany that we could potentially visit according to certain criteria. Are those sites you can still visit? Do they still exist? Are they castles, buildings, memorials potentially that would exist that could be connected? And listen, simply walks and potentially even sailing routes that people could follow, or riverboat trips that would interest them. So if we can find those sites and there's sufficient interest, then we can define the coordinates and the location and means of how to get there, potentially even in the future, envisage where the place to stay for people who want to visit. Links those sites, of course, to the new Jacobite Trail or Jacobite Scotland to allow us to stay there as soon as it is ready. So it is ready, but very much work in progress. As a matter of fact, I've already managed to upload the various pages that I've managed to come up with. As we say, it's still a work in progress. So the following opportunities really that can be taken from this trail are the following. So we can explain, of course, to the Jacobite supporters of Brittany that there's a connection between Brittany and the Stuarts. This is quite interesting because it's not just the Jacobite uprising, but whatever happened before is also interesting in that context. The story of the Jacobite uprising 1745 needs to be explained to the French people, so there's a momentum that can create to interest them in learning more about that period of their history, which has been very much occulted for centuries. The version that we have is an English version at the moment, that I've already translated it into French, so that could be potentially translated into other languages like the local Breton language to reach a wider audience, promote this local history and the cultural identity associated with the various locations. Also, we could imagine that such Jacobite Trail could be extended to other parts of Europe, of course, outside the scope of the Jacobite Scotland website, but there is a potential for creating a trail all the way from Italy through France to Brittany to Scotland and back to France and back to Italy, as you follow the footsteps of Prince Charles Edward Stuart. Right, the challenges is it's mainly maritime, fluvial, and coastal. So such a trail is not based on visiting hundreds of castles and looking for museums with lots of memorabilia, and that's part of the challenge we have. It's mostly outdoors, so walks, boat trips, guided tours. There are very few surviving artifacts. In fact, I was wondering if there's one in Brittany that actually is a genuine artifact, like a costume, or that would be, for instance, an element you can touch, which actually relates to the Jacobite uprising itself. You have to go outside Brittany. There's no museum of direct Jacobite interest. There are maritime museums which could link with ships being used at the time, but not directly connected to the Jacobite uprising. So the only thing we could do is temporary exhibitions in various locations to bring some interest to the local people. Many buildings and point of reference, mainly due to the lack of interest in the Jacobite heritage, have been either removed, destroyed, or not looked after. There's also a lack of interest from local authorities to raise commemorative plaques. So they need a lot of publicity to draw attention with conference exhibitions and, as I said, to create a momentum. Nevertheless, we won't give up so easily. And as you can see from these maps that we have quite a lot of interesting sites, either to the Stuarts or to the Jacobite uprising itself. So there's little town of Dole is claiming, probably for very good reasons, to be the birthplace of the Stuarts, as some people may not know that around the First Crusade, there was a chap named Alan, who was the servant of the Count of Dole, who to whom the Stuarts moved to England and then to Scotland, find a trace. So there's a great street, or high street of the Stuarts in Dole itself, which is really nice old town with lots of houses with exposed beams, deserve to be visited. Their main ports of, for instance, Brest is the main military naval port of the French Navy at the time. You will see that the main port of Nantes, which is the main capital city of Brittany, which is a duchy until 1532, is a main port with merchant activity, fortunately involved in triangular trade, so involved in merchant trading of slaves from the Black Africa to French West Indies, and then returning with sugar, indigo, coffee, and cocoa back to Nantes. And this was a port where a lot of Jacobites from Irish origins managed to find their way. There's a little port of Saint-Nazaire, which now has grown to a very large shipyard, which is a step further down from the River Loire, and the island of Belle-Île, which is very important, not only during this Jacobite uprising, as a stepping point of the Teillay, the ship that brought Prince Charles to Scotland, but also during the 7-Year War. It could also be because of the connection historically between Jacobite uprising. Somehow whatever followed the 7-Year War wasn't particularly good in the history books of France. That it could be the reason why we don't tend to talk too much about that period of time. There is also the port of Roscoff, which is very interesting, and we'll explain a bit later. But it is a port of return for the Prince Charles Stuart and his followers on board L'Heureux, followed with the Prince de Conti, the two ships that brought back Charles Edward Stuart on the 10th of October, 1746, and followed by a visit to Morlaix, and then further on Saint-Brieuc all the way to Paris. So this is a return path. There's a Cap Friel and Saint-Malo. Saint-Malo was a famous corsair port of Brittany, but it also did merchant trading, including slave trading as well. So it's often advertised as the city of corsair Brittany, but all these ports really did a bit of everything, really, whatever came to the benefit of the merchants and captains of various ships where they were hired to do various jobs, really. Cap Friel is a very beautiful place on the coast, and anchorage points from which the L'Heureux and the Prince de Conti ships stopped over to pick up aide de camp Richard Warren on the way to Scotland at the end of August 1746 to rescue Prince Charles Edward Stuart. So we'll carry on and start talking about some of those sites. So in order to really understand the first part of our story, which is the voyage of the prince to Scotland, I took on board to try to recreate a vintage style map, which I've used for this publication called the Teillay 15 Months of the Privateer, which hopefully will be published by the 1745 Association under the Jacobite publication. And this is the first step in our storyline. It'll try to be chronological to help following the trail. So the first point of call is Nantes, and you can see the departure of du Teillay from Nantes goes to Saint-Nazaire, Belle-Île, and then there's a rendezvous point with another ship called l'Elisabeth or the Elisabeth, depending how you spell it, with a S in French or Z in English. The two ships then moved on to the west coast of Brittany and faced another ship from the Royal Navy, HMS Lion, and it was a terrible battle that lasted 5.5 hours, which is well documented and including drawings and paintings by the Royal Navy or for the Royal Navy. And then the battle caused the two ships to drift. Not entirely sure the coordinates are really correct. It seems a very long path of about 100 miles for the ships to drift down southeast. But let's say those are the coordinates given by the various captains. Then the du Teillay had to carry on his own because the damage inflicted to the Elisabeth and HMS Lion was so great. Both ships had to return to their home port for repair. Then the du Teillay carried on all the way to Scotland, and that's the real start of the Jacobite uprising. The prince was then left in Borrowdale on the 8th of August, 1745, old style, and carried on all the way around the top of Scotland and to Amsterdam, where it was sold. And then we lose track of the ship at that point. So the first point is the departure of the ship from Nantes. And the record we have indicate that Prince Charles didn't actually start from Nantes, but took a river boat or two all the way to Saint-Nazaire ahead of the du Teillay. There have been delays due to contrary winds, also preparation and release of the ship from Nantes that would have indicated that ship would have departed later than the prince would have wanted. But there was an element of secrecy involved in making sure that the prince is not spotted. This is reflected in the outfits that he was wearing. As you know, he was wearing the cloth of student of divinity from the Scots College of Paris, or maybe Rome. Anyway, his black outfits gave him a nice cover. And he was supposedly the student accompanying the chaplain on board named James Butler of Nantes, who was fluent in English and French and could converse for the remainder of the journey with the prince at various times. So in fact, the ships probably sailed around the 1st of July. We don't know because it really left the port of Nantes secretly and arrived in a port called Mandin, as you can see here, just on the south bank of the Loire River. So this is a vintage map I've drawn on with a white pen. And as you can see, that it actually anchors in a natural port called Mandin, which is not really a full-size port, but more an anchorage point. And it stayed there for one night. And the next day, on the 2nd of July, 1745, the ship travels with a flotilla of other ships, so sort of hidden in between. Those ships are bound for the west of Brittany, but the du Teillay itself anchors in Bonance, which is a bay which is just located on west of the port of Saint-Nazaire, which was very small at the time. It was a small fort, fortified fort, hosting merchants and pilots who were resting in Saint-Nazaire. Various officers wanted to board various ships at that point. So it was very much a resting point, an outpost really, and the entrance of the River Loire. So basically,
whilst you're watching this. Yeah.
Sorry, there's somebody talking. All right. What the problem was is Bretons wasn't really in Saint-Nazaire. It was quite a secretive place, and the various followers of Prince Charles Stuart had to come make their own way to Saint-Nazaire to catch the du Teillay on the evening of the 2nd of July, 1745. So we don't know exactly how the 7 men of Moidart and various servants came. We just know definitely that Prince Charles Stuart, his mentor and tutor, Thomas Sheridan and Antoine Welch, traveled together to Saint-Nazaire, and the other passengers made their own way separately, bumping into each other in Saint-Nazaire, probably pretending not to know each other and staying in the local inns. So this is the first part of the journey. So I've just expanded the map, so you can see a little bit more on the 2nd of July, 5 a.m. All this is documented from the captain's log. So the captain of the Teillay wasn't Antoine Welch, as many people tend to believe most of the time. Antoine Welch was the ship owner, and he agreed to lend his ship to Prince Charles Edward Stuart only on the condition that he would accompany him all the way to Scotland and ensure his protection and safety. The captain was Claude Durbet, a very experienced captain who would later become a ship owner himself. And he was very much in control of the crew. And there were only 67 men on board, according to his account. That's much less than you would normally have had in a voyage of the ship a year earlier, which was probably 180 crew members. That's because you had to carry passengers, and compared to sailors, the space required for passengers was about 10 times more than one sailor would require, which meant that there were only 67 crews required and possible for the journey. So they must have selected the best sailors they could find. So the first point in the trail is Nantes. Nantes is a very interesting place because it was a nest of Jacobite of Irish descent, which are probably of second, third generation, some of them. And there was a quayside named La Fosse, called at the time in the 18th century, the quayside of the Irish Jacobites. But in general, we call them the Irish merchants or the Irish. So the quayside of the Irish. And the head of the Jacobites there was named Luc O'Shiel, and he had a secret society grouping various merchants who had interest in trying to regain possessions in Ireland. They slowly but surely made their way to Nantes from various other ports of Brittany, like Antoine Welch came from Saint-Malo, he was born there. Also, we had other people who came from Ireland. They were often members of the clergy. Seminars were built in Nantes to host Irish priests who came from Ireland to find refuge in Nantes. And that's why we see quite a few Irish chaplains on board ships around that time. The money that ship owners and captains made was often used for building their own private hotels. You can see quite a few in Nantes, and they usually bear the name of their captain or ship owner. So for instance, there's one called Hôtel Durbet, which is the name of the captain of the du Teillay, found on 86 Quai de la Fosse. One other ship owners or shareholder of the du Teillay was named Villepreux, again, as his own private hotel on Place de la Petite Hollande, not far away from the bridge on the right-hand side there. So they're very well decorated in the style of the middle of the 18th century called Rococo style and quite flamboyant Barocco style. And that's building, which can be seen these days, is separated between shops and various offices, tends to lean to the starboard side, as I say, because since he was a captain, it's quite amusing that those buildings were built on sandbanks, so they tend to sink with time, and this building didn't stay put and tend to lean a little bit. So the next step is Mardin, where there's a fort which hosts a maritime museum for the ships that tended to travel along the Loire River, which was a very busy port, very busy estuary. And the port of Mardin itself was often used for the ships as a stopover, so they would rest here, waiting for their next mission, either coming back from their voyage, waiting for the winds to blow in the right direction, or coming from Nantes or Paimboeuf, which is the avant-port of Nantes, in order to sail away towards Brittany and their final destination. The next point on our trail is Saint-Nazaire itself, which was a very small outpost, just in position A here. There is a house, or there was a house, that was named the House of the Pretender, or the Young Pretender, on 42nd of Grand Rue. This particular house, unfortunately, was destroyed at the beginning of the 20th century to make way for the south entrance of the port, which was expanded to make way for the shipyards to be built. So the commercial activity caused the destruction of one of our few artifacts. And position B is a manor that could have been used, although we have no proof of it. Manoir du Sable still stands today, which is the oldest building in the town of Saint-Nazaire, dates of the 15th century. At the time, there were also a lot of dunes all along the coastline, where the prince might have walked along and picked some seeds of the little flower that you might find on Eriskay. So that's a legend that might be true, and maybe one of the followers as well, who landed on Eriskay with the prince, might have picked up some seeds, and they traveled very well apparently, and they could have been seeded. They could have seeded the island of Eriskay all the way from Saint-Nazaire. So you see that Bonance in position C can be reached by foot or by horse at the time. And there's a coastal path that you can follow, which is about 3 or 4 miles, to reach the Bay of Bonance, where we believe the prince embarked on board the Teillay around 7 o'clock in the evening on the 2nd of July, 1745. So the next day, the ship sailed at 5 a.m. Towards the south first, with easterly wind. And unfortunately, around 12 of that day, the wind shifted to the west, so the ship had to sail against the wind. And you can see the tacking point that I've tried to recreate on the right-hand side to reach Belle-Île. And that happened all day until the next morning at 5 a.m. Then eventually the Teillay managed to find an anchorage point just off the main port of Le Palais on the north-west coast of Belle-Île. So from that point on, they had to wait a good 9 days until the Elisabeth came and had to be released against the payment of 1,500 livres tournois, which is quite a bit of money. It would have been something like 22,000 pounds in today's money. So let's put it this way: it was a bribe, to release that ship so it could sail away. And that was very much a large ship, 64 cannons, and used as escort ships on corsair duties, but much larger than the Teillay, which was only 78 feet long and 175 tons. So it was reasonably small ship compared to his escort, the Elisabeth, was supposed to carry most of the troops to Scotland, made of the Irish regiments of Lord Clare, as well as a company of Morpa of cadets. Also carrying a lot of the muskets and some gold, as well as swords, broadswords, to help with the uprising. Unfortunately, the ship, as you know, was stopped at a later stage by HMS Lion, and they fought a terrible battle, as I mentioned earlier. And you can see a little subset of that battle in position 5 on our trail, just off the coast of Uahm. It's probably a little bit more south than most people would think it would have taken place, and much further west, drifting towards the southeast. There is an account that was made by the captain of HMS Lion, Percy Brett, quite a detailed account, and its counterpart also made an account by Captain Claude Durbet of the Teillay wrote his own captain's log for the duration of a whole voyage of the Teillay. Interestingly, this allows us to bridge together the various elements, including coordinate the start and the end of the battle. And it's a terrible battle that cost hundreds of lives. It's fairly well documented, yet not easy to picture without all the elements. And I've tried to represent, based on the information we've got, which I don't quite believe is entirely true, the events that took place and the ships having to go back. The Elisabeth had to go back to Brest for major repairs, and HMS Lion go back to Plymouth. So we now move on to trail number 5 position, which brings us back to Paimboeuf, which is the avant-port on the River Loire. It's a different voyage, so I have to stop the voyage of the Teillay because now the Teillay has gone around the west coast of Ireland and left the prince and his followers, and 9 men of Moidart plus servants in Scotland. The Jacobite uprising is taken place, and then desperate need for weapons, ammunition, and gold is required, and desperate measures are taken place to try to bring support, relief support to the Jacobite army in March and April 1746. One of the missions is by Mars and La Bellone from Nantes. So those are 2 ships that are corsair ships that have been hired for a great amount of money. In today's money, the expedition, according to the memorandum of Antoine Welch, who chartered those 2 ships, is equivalent to 18.5 million pounds today's money. And the amount of gold that it carried would be equivalent to 4.5 million pounds. So it's an extraordinary amount of money spent by King Louis XV. Whereas the first voyage of the Teillay was very much a secret operation or secret expedition by the prince. This mission, which is the first rescue mission in a way, the prince is already in Scotland, but things are starting to look a bit grim for the Jacobite army due to the lack of support and supply from France, and therefore the mission has 2 separate goals. One is to bring support to the Jacobite army, financial and supplies as well, and the other is if something terrible happens, like the Jacobite army is defeated, then their mission would be to try to bring back the prince to safety. So unfortunately, they can't find the prince, and when they arrive in Loch they face 3 ships of the Royal Navy, and the last battle of the Jacobite uprising, you could say. and they cannot locate the prince, but they bring back various Jacobites in exile, including Lord Elcho, and the ships come back without the gold and the ammunition and the powder, but they bring back Thomas Sheridan, and the Mars with the other ship brings back Lord Elcho to Pembroke. What's quite interesting here is that the lords, I managed to make it, the Scottish lords managed to make it to Pembroke, arrive in their clothes they were wearing since the Battle of Culloden, and they haven't changed since. So they look like beggars, and they unfortunately welcome with abuse by the locals until the captain of the ship, Antoine Rouillet, tell them, no, those are lords from Scotland and they need to be treated with respect. And the local people apologize profusely and then welcome the Scottish lords in Brittany. At that point, they are taken care of, given fresh linen, and they go into exile. Unfortunately for Thomas Sheridan, who was traveling on La Bellone, is summoned by James III to Rome to explain why his son hasn't made it back and why he's made it and not his son. And unfortunately, the poor Thomas Sheridan has a lot of explanation to do, and he doesn't survive his ordeal, and it dies in 1746, pretty much forgotten and humiliated by his return without a prince. So a bit more cheerful maybe is the sixth mission to rescue Prince Charles Edward Stuart in October 1746. So there are two ships leaving Saint-Malo, L'Heureux and the Prince de Conti. They belong to Richard Butler, who is the brother-in-law of Antoine Welsh. Antoine Welsh is original from Saint-Malo, and his sisters married another corsair captain and ship owner named Richard Butler. By the time around April, May 1746, Antoine Welsh has fallen out of favor, is blamed for overinflating the support of the English Jacobites during the Jacobite uprising, and the foreign minister, Marquis of Argenson, put the blame on him, and he falls out of disgrace, out of favor in Versailles at the French court. Therefore, he's no longer able to play a direct role, but his brother-in-law is. And he has two ships that the French court is going to use and fund for the sixth mission to rescue Prince Charles Edward Stuart. So the ships are ready to depart. They should have been accompanied by the two other ships that were in repair, the Mars and La Bellone, but they needed a lot more time to be ready for departure. So the only two ships available were L'Heureux and Le Prince de Conti. And L'Heureux was captained by Pierre Bernard to Houard de Beaulieu. And the other ship, Le Prince de Conti, was captained by a young 21-year-old captain named Marion Dufresne, who became a famous explorer at a later stage. So of the two, the elder is de Beaulieu, and is actually very much the sea captain and responsible for the voyage and the rescue mission, is held by the superintendent of the mission, is in fact the aide-de-camp to Lord George Murray, and his name is Richard Warren, who will later become a baron, and will also be given the command of Belle-Île, which we saw earlier in 1763. So in this case, he's been given the task to assemble together troops and which are very much Irish volunteers, as well as be the head of the mission, which is controlled by himself, but with the command of 2 ships given to the 2 captains from Saint-Malo, W and Dufresne, Marion Dufresne, we call him usually. So they depart from Saint-Malo on the 24th of August, and in fact reach the port or anchorage point in Cape Friel, which is located, as you see on the map, just northwest of Saint-Malo. So this is an anchorage point which is very much used to wait for troops to board. And instead of the various captains involved in the rescue mission, Lynch, Sheridan, who is the nephew of Thomas Sheridan, we travel on the Prince de Conti, and on L'Heureux we have Richard Warren and Captain Auburn, who are actually boarding in Cape Friel. So they are not boarding in Saint-Malo. The reason being that there's an element of secrecy involved, and also the 2 ships were not quite ready and needed another sort of 7 days to be fully ready and ready to depart to travel to Scotland, around the west of Ireland. Now, it didn't really start very well for them, because they've immediately faced vessels of the Royal Navy patrolling off the coast of Brest, and they had to sail south first to the Bay of Biscay until they could escape from the British ships chasing them. And in order to take no risk at all, they gave a very wide berth to Ireland, sailing far west of Ireland before they could reach the Outer Hebrides and eventually go in search of the prince, which they eventually managed to contact in Loch, and him and his followers boarded L'Heureux. And it's an incredible story. I really find interesting as much as the departure of the Teillay, because there's a lot involved in there. It's quite complex, the boarding of the prince and the departure from the west of Scotland. There's also another gentleman who wasn't really a gentleman, who was chasing the prince. The famous Cole MacDonald of Barrisdale, sorry, who was made prisoner on board L'Heureux and jailed in Brittany. Actually, he was jailed, I think in another prison, but he wasn't sentenced to death on the spot, as Gentle Lucky would have liked to passing through or running through, as to say. But he was saved by Prince Charles Stuart and less spared. Eventually, I think he found himself going back to Scotland and jailed in Edinburgh, where he passed away eventually. So it's a very interesting story, I find, on the side of the rescue mission itself. So the prince eventually came back to Brittany in Roscoff. It's a little port on the north coast of Brittany. It's an interesting place because in 1548, his ancestor, Mary Stuart, actually landed in Brittany in order to become the wife of the future King of France, Francis II, who only lived a year as a King of France, and then marry Queen of Scots, as she already was at the death of her mother, Mary of Guise, found herself traveling, being forced to go back to Scotland, and then their ordeal started. And of course, as we know, she's very much a Queen martyr, but she's been she has not been forgotten in Roscoff, and even in 1930s, recreated his arrival in 1548 and celebrated arrival, sort of did a reenactment with the 4 Marys who were following her as she was an infant back then. So the prince arrives in Roscoff, is not necessarily understood because he's unexpected. The ships are supposed to arrive incognito, and effectively that's what happens. So the local people just don't know who those people are. They hear rumors that there are 2 ships bearing the French flag, but they're not necessarily friendly. We don't know, and there may be a king of England or some famous character on board. So local people are very interested to come to see in the morning of the 10th of October, 1746, who's coming to port. And it turned out that the Coast Guard captain, a gentleman named Conti de Bretany, is a bit aware that these might be Englishmen in disguise. So he's sent 300 troops with him to check on the identity of the people who are coming down. Eventually, the truth is revealed. The prince has landed with his followers, and initially, the local people do the same as Lord Elcho. They laughed as the poor old group of Scots lords and the prince, because they're wearing their clothes, so pretty much surprising clothes for the Breton people, as they see them wearing skirts in tatters and dirty clothes and big boots. And because they're not wearing trousers, you can see their legs, and they found that very funny. So eventually they ignore the jokes pointed at them. And the prince is welcome in Roscoff by the major of the troops until the captain general, Conti de Bretany, arrives and takes him to his own house, which is in Saint-Paul-de-Léon. So the prince has a chance in between to rest a little bit and go and see the chapel of Saint-Ninian, who is very much a place that the Bretons used to remember Mary Queen of Scots. And so he pays his respect in the chapel before he moves to Saint-Paul-de-Léon, and he's welcomed by his host. He doesn't stay there for very long because he's in a hurry to try to reach Paris and meet his younger brother, and also have a meeting with the King of France. So he moves to Saint-Paul-de-Léon, which is only a few miles south east of Roscoff. And here we go. So you can see it from the map there, Roscoff, Saint-Paul-de-Léon. And the place where he's resting is near Plouguenant. This is a property of the Comte de Bretany. It's a castle that still exists called Kervoli. I've just been finding out today. And then the same night ends up in Morlaix, which is a very old town, where he eventually sleeps in a bed for the first time in 5 months. It doesn't stay there long. The next morning, he actually traveled to Saint-Brieuc. And yet again, the next morning after that is on his way to Fontainebleau. This account can be found in the memoirs of the Duke of de Luynes, Duc de Luynes. And although there's more complementary information I found today about the local knowledge that we have of his stay in Roscoff, the people involved and where he would have stayed. So it's an interesting development in the trail that could make here. Now, the last port that we have on, which is further inland, not quite in Brittany, but it's the only place I would suggest people can visit to see a bit of memorabilia of Prince Charles Edward Stuart being seen on a painting together with Antoine Walsh. So this is the castle of Serran along the Loire River. It's basically around 50 miles west of Nantes, towards Angers, just near Saint-Georges-sur-Loire, just southwest of Angers. It's a beautiful castle which has been built and extended over the centuries and survived the French Revolution and the Second World War. And it's got a beautiful library in which we can find a painting made in 1755 in honor of the voyage to Scotland, and especially the letters given to Antwerp Watch by the seashore of Loch on the 8th of August 1745. The shores themselves, to me, I visited the place quite a few times, they look a bit more like Loch to me, where the letter were written, than Loch itself. But it's very much from the fruit of the imagination of a Parisian painter, whom we believe has painted this. It's in need of restoration. But if you look at the details on the right-hand side, you can see there's a lot of fine details. And the main problem is the lacquer on the painting, which is 267-year-old. It's never been restored once. It's got a beautiful frame. And as you see, the arms of the stewards, the royal stewards' arms on the top corner there. And lots of details. Of course, that if there's enough money one day to refurbish this painting, and the curator tells me that it's going to need some restoration at some point, but the money is not available at that point in time, there will be interesting writing emerging on the bottom right corner of the painting. Also, details of the actual du Teillay on the left-hand side, which is very much in a heave-to position, will be revealed, and it's basically the ship is waiting for Antoine Watch to be ready, so that it can then depart from Scotland, and they can then sail to Amsterdam. So here's the end of this talk. Thank you very much for listening. I'm slightly extended my talk, but you're more than welcome to ask questions. And very much thank you for listening.